just want to take a few minutes and say thank you to all of you who have come here today. My name is Cecelia. Youts, Nuyam Zeets, Extuquia, Kalasinugua, Gakelin, Samotier. This has been a really hard week. And the compassion that I've witnessed in our community and beyond our community has been heartwarming. And for all of you to come here and stand today, to take a few minutes out of your day, out of your lives, to recognize 215 babies. I don't call them children. They were somebody's babies. And it doesn't matter how old our children are, they're babies to us still. So I call them the babies. Indigenous communities all across this country are in grief. And when we grieve, we usually slow down. That's the way we do it. We're supposed to stop and be quiet. Instead, not for me, it didn't work out that way this time. I was reignited. So I'm warning everybody now. There's a lot of people on fire that want some things done. And I'm going to ask you all to walk along with us. Because this is not a journey just for Indigenous people to do. This is a journey for each one of us as Canadians to do. And we are all coming together to do that work in a good way. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about being angry. It's not about being angry at a certain religion, a certain group of people. My dad taught me to walk in this world with grace. And the grace is embracing each other as brothers and sisters in this country. My dad also taught me to walk softly. Walk softly. And even though there's so much hurt, the Indigenous communities and the Indigenous people in this country are walking softly. How much grace we have. And I understand that those 215 babies have awoken this country. And we have to do whatever it takes to bring them home. Whatever it takes. Governments have a responsibility. Churches have a responsibility. I've talked about that. What we're doing right now is symbolic. The lowering of the flags right here. Symbolic. Wearing our own shirts are symbolic. Lighting a candle is symbolic. That's the easy stuff. And that's what we need to do right now. But we have to understand there's a hard road ahead of us. There's work to be done.
My name is John Johnstone, and I get to sit on the board of Lower Fraser Valley Aboriginal Society and journey with a great group of people. And yeah, that's part of what tonight is journeying with great people like everyone that is out there tonight. I'm part of the 60 Scoop, and so I never grew up with my culture, language, spirituality, or any of my Homach ways. I have been blessed and honored to learn some of my language at Kwantlen through Sesmalot. So I'd like to say, Asiem itanasiea, itanasialaqua, itanasqualaqua, itsepu walial, antha chan, Talitsin ak likamel e wantlan datumuk. I would also say, Mitsep kwatwilam tana tumuk, haha tumuk, ayamach tumuk. Hilak tana squalo and quatsits quatsnala, tanaweo, heitsepka. Also, I would say, Itzen kilas. I am sad. It is a sad thing that has happened. Itzen ias. I am happy that you are all here to share in it. I am happy. I think the 215 is nothing that is new to anyone that is an Indigenous person. It was always told, the stories. I have had the honor to be able to sit in communities and listen again to the survivors tell some of their stories and see the pain that is in them and through them and coming from them. And with that, I want to ask, I don't know if you want to call it reconciliation, conciliation, or rightnessness of relationship, but there is a great need that we begin to journey properly, that we begin to journey together in a good way. It will definitely not be fair to our elders and our survivors and our communities if all that happens out of these 215 children that have been found, if all that happens is that we upset the communities again. So I want to ask that we would look to our past and understand it and know it well, so that we might be able to take a good step forward. For it is nothing in the future that has brought us to this day today, but it is everything in the past that has brought us here. So once we understand our past well, we might be able to take a good step forward. So again, I would ask that government, please do not let this be nothing. To the education systems, I would ask, please do not let this be nothing. Itzen Ham. Itzen Keelis. It's a sad thing. I am crying. I'm sorry. We have to find our ways. We have to find our strengths to move forward in a good way. It will take good minds, good hearts, good footsteps forward. Please do not let this be something that does not move us in that direction. All my relations, Aitzepka.
Welcome to this special service of United Churches of Langley Online. We honor National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is tomorrow, June 21st. And also the whole month of June is National Aboriginal History Month. Today is also Father's Day, a day to celebrate the people in our lives who have loved and cared for us, provided protection and direction. Those who have inspired us into action and picked us back up again when we have fallen and failed. Today, you will see some snapshots of the vigil held at Derrick Doubleday Arboretum for the 215 babies found buried at the Kamloops Residential School. We will listen, pray, lament, and be in reflection and conversation with Cecelia Reekie on what we, as individuals and as a church, are called to be and to do with what we have now heard, not for the first time, but have now really heard and seen. and now must respond. As part of our worship experience each week, we acknowledge that we gather on the ancestral and unceded land of the Kwantlen, the Matsqui, the Katsi, and the Semiahmoo people. These can become hollow words unless we ask ourselves what they really mean to us and what words and actions are being called forth from us individually and as a community of faith. During June, National Indigenous History Month, we are going to personalize these words so that when we say them and when we hear them, they have meaning beyond the repetitive use of them in liturgy. The nation that we are highlighting today is the Kwantlen Nation. It's one that we have the most connection with here in the Langley area. We have worked on reconciliation and forging a relationship with Kwantlen First Nation Chief Marilyn Gabriel, with her husband Kevin Kelly and son Michael Kelly Gabriel. We have interacted and learned from and connected with Josette, a returning elder, now teacher of Little Feathers, and Josette's sons who work in the school system and as storytellers. We were invited into their longhouse, where we shared stories and drumming during one of our reconciliation walks. They were part of the Reconciliation Langley events that we held here in our building with Roy Henry Vickers and Phyllis Webstat for her Orange Shirt book launch. They have spoken tenderly of being in a church and yet feeling welcome and safe in our church. Hildy and Chief Marilyn were part of a memorial in Fort Langley together. The Kwantlen First Nation is committed to environmental sustainability that preserves our natural resources for generations to come. Kwantlen traditional territory extends from Richmond and New Westminster in the west to Surrey and Langley in the south, and east to Mission and to the northernmost reaches of Stave Lake. On their website, they definitively say, "We are united as one nation and one family. We believe in leadership with vision that values stewardship, protection of resources, prosperity, equality, and inclusion of our membership." They have walked the path of reconciliation, and Luke, one of the ministers in Fort Langley, shared with me on a day when a building was burning down in Fort Langley in very late into the late hours of night. As Luke was tending to some of the people, because it was a building right by his home, Chief Marilyn shows up and says, "How can we help?" A part of a community, stepping forward and being part of what needs to happen in the moment to be in community together. Cheryl Gabriel, sister of Chief Marilyn, spoke at the Vigil last Friday, where we honored the 215 babies found buried at the Kamloops Residential School. Let us take a moment to honor the Kwantlen ancestry and their stewardship of the land, their commitment to right relationship and community, as we walk in the spirit of reconciliation with them. We gather on this day in mind, body, and spirit. We gather to remember a painful history and an inspired response. We come seeking healing of the body of Christ. We come to confess, to love and be loved, to be a church that is an instrument of healing and justice and reconciliation in the world. God of kingdom, send your Holy Spirit upon us. We welcome your Spirit into our minds as our thinking. We welcome your Spirit into our senses as perceiving. We welcome your Spirit into our throats as our speaking. We welcome your Spirit into our hearts as our loving. We welcome your Spirit into our bodies as our moving. All so that we may love and serve the world. Amen.
God weeps at love withheld, at strength misused, at children's innocence abused, and till we change the way we love, God weeps.
God bleeds at anger's fist, at trust betrayed, at women battered and afraid, until we change the way we win. God bleeds. God cries at hungry mouths, at running souls, at creatures dying without cause, until we change the way we care. God cries. God waits for stones to melt, for peace to seed, for hearts to hold each other's need, until we understand the Christ. God waits.
Hear the words of the prophet Isaiah, words of call for our time and our place. Isaiah 58. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and God will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger and the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose water never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. United Church of Canada moderator Jordan Cantwell wrote in her April 2016 pastoral letter, "It is a comforting thought that we can revisit the past and make amends, that we can repair what we have torn apart and restore what we have destroyed. But as Isaiah reminds us, it is a choice we make." 5 years ago, moderator Cantwell asked us to recommit to that choice that we made 30 years before and continue the journey from apology to reconciliation. I stand before you today, 5 years later, asking again, let us recommit to our now 35-year-again choice. Let us take it to another level. Reignite our commitment and ask ourselves, what does it mean to be repairers of the breach? How do we truly hear and see and listen to the stories of the breach that has occurred? Open up to new information about bodies found, and remind ourselves what the survivors told us years ago. The children did not come home. How might we return the children home? Commit to finding the babies that are buried deep beneath the earth, buried secretly, anonymously. Find them and help their families bring them home. Is that what it means to be repairers of the breach? We are not called into guilt or shame. We must not be paralyzed by these emotions. We must be catalyzed in some way. Let's hear how we might respond and recommit ourselves to this path of healing. Well, what an honor and delight it is to be here with my dear friend, Cecelia Reekie. It's been quite a week, quite a couple of weeks. And so Cecelia has joined us today on this weekend and celebration service of National Aboriginal History Month, and in particular in honor of June 21st, National Indigenous Peoples Day. It's a time where we honor the lives, and in particular in this 2-week window, the lives of survivors. And so, wow, Cecelia, this has been a week of ups and downs and all arounds of, and I know you traveled out to Kamloops because you knew that's where you needed to be, and then shared at the Vigil on Friday night the 11th, how impactful that was for you and how it's ignited a part of you. And so I'm wondering, can you share a little bit about what being at Kamloops at the site of the 215 babies, as you call them,
Yes.
the babies, the children?
I think for me, just even the drive up, I was anxious, especially particularly as I was getting closer, just feeling unsettled. And I think a lot of Canadians had that same feeling of feeling unsettled. Once I arrived on the site, it was so beautiful, and the nation in particular they were so warm and welcoming to every single person that arrived. They thanked them for coming. There was just such grace from the community. And as people were gathering and standing, I mean, some didn't want to leave, like they stayed for a couple hours. I stayed for the day, because I think we kind of all felt this sense of connectedness to each other and to the babies. And you're right, I do refer to them as babies because they were somebody's babies. And so for me, it's hard when I hear in the media children, because I go to that place of these were somebody's babies. A mom was missing her baby. A dad was missing her baby. Grandma and grandpa were missing their babies. And for some of those babies, we don't know who they are yet. And we don't know which community they come from. So, it is why, for me, it's so important to refer to them as babies. And being a mom of 2 adult sons, they're still my babies. And we all can relate and understand that passion and the love we have for our children, no matter how old they are. And so, I just got this tremendous, in the beginning I was feeling very unsettled. And as I even was there for maybe within an hour, it was so peaceful and so beautiful, and just watching people come with their children and teaching their children the conversation, difficult conversations, not having the answers, and I think that's important. We don't have the answers. We're sorting out those answers, and we're questioning ourselves as Canadians, as people of faith, as Indigenous people. Yes. How could this have happened? But there at the site, it was just very peaceful. And people were showing up, and they would bring flowers or little gifts to leave on the grounds. They would take a few minutes to look and reflect. And, then an Indigenous person would come, and her gift was a jingle dance. And so she would put her music on, and she was in a regalia, and she would say, "This is the way that I can pray for those 215 children." Or somebody have a drum and to sing a song from their community. So it was it was just, when I think back to that day and at that time, all I could think about is all of us coming together. There was no looking at each other's skin color, or are we Indigenous, or are we not, or where are you, a certain faith. I don't think we weren't doing that. We were just coming together as people who were shocked, saddened, trying to sort out all those emotions, and we were able to do it. And I think everybody felt supported. I know I felt supported, even just from the broader community of those who were there and gathering. And it was just a continual stream of people coming throughout the day. It was never really quiet. It was in the evening, and I had to stay till dark because the nation would light up the school in orange lights. And, the orange being the symbolism of residential school survivors and the work that we need to do on Orange Shirt Day and knowing that history. And so for me to see this school, and it's still standing and it's big, to see it all in orange, it was really beautiful. And it just changed it from this big red brick building to this beautiful soft glow of an orange in the evening. And for me, it just, again, I sat and just looked at it, and it was just so peaceful.
It sounds like the light of the children shone upon all those people who came to honor them.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it seems like this has been an awakening for many. With you and your involvement in reconciliation and being part of the TRC with your dad, the stories were told. The stories were documented. And I think you shared with me Volume 4 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission documents, and yet now it's taken us seeing the evidence.
Yeah, I think, I reflect on that because, I have all the volumes of the TRC on my bookshelf in my study, and, along with hundreds of other books. But I don't ever remember making the connection, and I think we all, as human beings, take what we can and absorb what we can when we know we can. And so although I probably looked at it, it was probably too much for me to even grasp the idea. And, you hear stories, but it's another thing to see a volume that's, 2 inches thick that's been documented of survivors telling the stories about children that had either gone missing, had passed away. And yet, it's been documented for a few years. And the stories have been documented for hundreds.
Yeah, they've been told over and over, yeah.
So, yeah, I think we're at a place in time where we need to now have these heavy, difficult, sad conversations about the truth. And, maybe we could only do the truth to a certain extent, including myself, about even just the general history of residential schools. And now we're going deeper. Now we need to go deeper. And perhaps those 215 babies have brought the light to us that we can not forget, that we acknowledge, and that we need understanding for.
Yeah.
And so perhaps that was an important, that it happened, and perhaps it was meant to happen at this time, when we were ready to go into this deeper conversation.
And how do we keep this awakeness that we've been given as the numbers grow? Because you and I both, you and I have both talked about how now we already are having people step forward and doing the scanning of other properties, and I think we're now only 127 to go. Yes. Sadly. And how do we keep the story of the 215 alive enough as the numbers grow and the awareness grows?
Yeah, and my hope would be that we would add to those numbers, and those numbers would be as significant as the 215. So when we sadly get to 300 or 400 or however high it may go, that those numbers are as significant as the 215. And that we understand that they are somebody's babies. And if we can keep going back to that, I think that's really important. It's really easy to kind of not make an emotional connection. And in order to become passionate about something or to want to make change, you have to be able to make that connection. So I think keeping those babies, maybe it's one at a time, it's one residential school at a time, but we need to, as we start to discover more, we need to remember that they were somebody's babies. And we need to honor that community and those families with the same compassion and the same level of empathy that we're seeing right now in this country.
I know one of the ways that you're helping to make this really personal and real for people is to create some symbolic places where people can see symbols of these 215 babies. So can you tell maybe a little bit about the vigil and what happened then?
Yeah. Well, symbolism is important. The church and the building is symbolic. We have symbolism around us all the time in our communities, in our homes. It's everywhere. So for me, the lowering of the flags is symbolic. The government of Canada and the province of British Columbia has, very much called for the flags to be lowered. We don't know how long they're going to be lowered. It's actually, I think, one of the few times in history, if ever, I don't know if it's ever been done, where the flags have been lowered with no date to raise them, which is interesting. And quite profound, I think, at how big this is. And big meaning we're just not sure how this is all going to play out yet, because this is the first time we're, as a country, are dealing with something like this. And so, the symbolism of lowering the flags is very significant. The wearing of orange shirts is significant. Lighting candles, having crosses, all of those are symbolic, which are important, because that's kind of like the first step into understanding. And, so they are very important. My hope is that, as we move out of the symbolism, because we do have to do that, we're going to understand that we as Canadians have a lot of work to do, and that journey and that path is not going to be easy. But yes, taking time to have the symbolism is also really important. So, when we organized the vigil for last Friday, and we put it together in 4 days, and it was a huge community effort, and people really stepped in to say, what do you need, and how can we help? And, so we had it at the Derek Doubleday Arboretum. We had lanterns, and we had little orange shirts that were numbered from 0 to 215. And people were able to walk along a path, read information about the history of residential schools, and then put their lantern in the ground, which I think even just to have people do that and take time to reflect and to be a part of the process, because I think people want to be a part of this process. They don't want everybody to do all the work. Like, that's part of reconciliation, is our work we do on our own and with each other. And so our community coming together, I think, was quite a statement. And it was beautiful, and there are little orange shirts that were made even by this church and by people from this church, and they're planted at the park. And when I drove to Kamloops, as I was coming into the reserve in Kamloops, along the side of the highway were crosses with clothing on it. And it really took my breath away to see them. And as I was driving by them, it was so moving for me. I can't really describe it, because it was almost like a loss. It was grief. It was another symbol of the loss, the symbolism of the loss. And so in the last couple of days, the last few days, I have been working to get 215 little wooden crosses made, to have 215 little outfits put on the crosses. So last Tuesday, we had the opportunity to come together. I had people volunteer to help place the crosses, and they will be up there for a period of time. And it'll, again, inviting the community, the broader community of Langley, to come and reflect and just sit quietly. For me, it is really important to keep the children, the babies in our prayers, to keep the families and the communities. Communities across Canada are grieving. Indigenous communities across Canada, the grief is palpable. And I think it's really important that my message as an Indigenous person is to let other Indigenous communities know they're not alone. And if this is, a way that we as a community, the broader community of Langley, can honor this tragedy, then to me that's so important. So that's, really why I had this crazy idea in my head, but we were able to get it done, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
On the crosses, if people go and take a look, you'll see pajamas, you will see little dresses. Some are very dressy, some are casual little sundresses. Some have been, there's a little firefighter costume. Those are things that our children probably weren't able to do, to dress up, to be little kids. When we think about our children in our families and our communities who enjoy dress up, or to get a little dress on. So for me, it was really important that I chose different outfits for the crosses. Was very significant.
Yeah. And it reminds me a lot of Phyllis's story of having her orange shirt taken away. Or I want to just speak for a minute about your beautiful dad. And you had shared a story of a birthday party that I helped host at the TRC at the PNE a number of years ago, and how, as a survivor, as a student at a residential school, how impactful that was for him to have his birthday celebrated as part of the TRC, like the children who will be donned on the crosses in clothing that they did not get to have.
Yeah, I think, again, we're coming back to this whole symbolism, and it is really important. The birthday celebration, we were talking about that the other day, and I didn't even know that you had been a part of that birthday celebration. And this was, at the TRC in Vancouver, and they had people volunteer to make cupcakes, and a lot of cupcakes. And then at one point through the TRC, most of the people were in one of the buildings because it was being held at the PNE. And a lot of us were in this one big building, and then all of a sudden the music started, and I don't even think people knew what was coming yet. And then people came running in with trays of cupcakes, and they were singing, and the energy, it was like a celebration. And then they were singing happy birthday to survivors. And yes, children at residential school very few were ever celebrated their birthdays, or their birthdays were even acknowledged. And my dad, as a survivor of Alberni Residential School, I remember looking over at him and just seeing tears in his eyes, and he was just so moved by the thought, and somebody gave him a cupcake. And and I just thought that this is so huge, and there are little things we can all do that we think are little, but they're so important to the healing journey. And we all have that role, and we can all do something. It's not always just about money or the grandiose things. It can be that simple gesture that can really go a long way in changing somebody's view or how they feel about themselves. And then what was amazing was survivors and family members were able to go up on stage and sing happy birthday in their language. And so we got to hear all these different languages from all over the place, all over Canada, as the one at a time got up to sing a verse in their language. And almost, again, symbolic that they didn't take our language away. That we could still speak our language, that my dad was fluent in his language. And that it was almost like taking ownership back. Like, you see, you didn't take everything away from us, because I can still sing happy birthday in my language. And so to watch them sing on stage was so beautiful. I don't even know if that had been planned, but what a statement. And it was so powerful that they were able to do that. So there's been, with my journey in reconciliation, just been so many amazing moments. And, I was blessed that I was able to do that journey with my dad. And I was blessed that, given this is Father's Day, given National Indigenous Peoples Day tomorrow, I'm very lucky that I had two dads, two very important men in my life, two men who I call both my dads, but had different parts to play in my life as well. And I was able to have them both in my heart and in my life, and also for the two of them to be very important to each other and to watch them. In some ways, I think they almost became brothers, and to watch that relationship also was very special and very unique to witness as well. And something that I hold near and dear to my heart. That I think that there was healing that happened all the way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for you, you're this beautiful intertwining weaving, very much like the braid, where you have these two very different worlds and families, yet you're the thread that brought them together. That you are the common thing that without that center thread, a braid doesn't happen. And I just think that's so beautiful that you've lived a life that was engaged with the church. You've lived a life that has reclaimed your heritage and your family and worked to find that place of belonging in these worlds, and helped those of us who are not in some of those worlds, but yet want to be honoring and caring in community with a world that we do not know, a pain that we do not know, a breach. Our reading today was from Isaiah that talks about when we're ready, we can be the repairs of the breach. And so we created that breach. It's not some distant group of people that created the breach, that hurt the families, that tore the children out of the centers of those communities. It was us, the church, the people of Canada, who did this. And now we have the opportunity, the choice. Now 35 years after the apology of the United Church of Canada, what does that actually mean? And in light of the babies being found in Kamloops and other places, what does that mean for the Pacific Mountain region about Alberni, the residential school where your dad was, or the other schools where the 10 siblings of your dad were scattered amongst? What does it mean for the church to be a repairer of the breach that we were a part of creating, and now have the chance, the choice, to choose to be part of the reparation of that?
Yeah, you bring up a lot in that statement as I think about it. And I think, one of the important things, and I say this to even children when I'm talking to them in schools, which is the work that I do. For me, this is not about blame. No. It's not about pointing fingers. It is about the institutions. And when we represent an institution, that doesn't mean that you were personally involved, but within the institution there was involvement. And it is about breaking down those institutions and trying to figure out, one, how did we get here? But more importantly, how do we go forward? And I don't want people to carry guilt.
Yes.
And it's really important for me because we can't change this history. And, and I listen to survivor stories, and I've listened to my dad. And, my dad really got to a place where he could forgive the church. And that wasn't easy. And he had a tough life and a difficult life because of the church. For what he believed, right? That the church did this. And yes, because there's some element that everybody knew kind of what was going on. And I'm not talking individuals within the church, but certainly higher up in institutions, there were alarm bells going off that should have been paid attention to, and they weren't. And but I also think it's really important that we have to look at ourselves and go, now I am a part of this, and what can I do? And so it's not about owning it, because you can't own it if you didn't do it. But now that you know what was done through the institution, you can't not do anything about it now.
Yes.
So now that we know, and we know there are babies, and when we hear, as an example, that a residential school run by the United Church that perhaps, 6 months from now or a year from now, we discover that there are children on that site, babies on that site, then the United Church and those involved in the church cannot distance themselves. They need to say, and they need to ask themselves, now what can I do? Because I now know the truth. So what can I do going forward? I can't change the past, but I can certainly help heal relationships. I can certainly help heal the communities. And that is done on the Indigenous peoples' ability. And it's not going in and asking for forgiveness, and it's not going in and trying to fix things. It's about allowing relationships to build that are respectful. And, I look at you and I, and we've done it. And I looked at my two fathers, and they did it. It can be done, and it's not easy, and it's work. But I think we're in a place in time in Canada where we need to start really those hard conversations. And for those that have already started, it'll be a continuation. For me, I was so passionate about reconciliation, and I had to take a break. It was so important. I had to take a break. I was exhausted, and this is hard work, and that's okay that you can take a break. But I also realized that, in the last 2 weeks over this sad news, it also reignited a fire in me and a passion that I'm going to continue the work, and that this is important to me, and the stories are important, and we need to do it with honor and respect, courage, and
humility.
we all need to do
humility.
that. Humility, compassion. And it takes courage to understand this. It takes courage to understand this.
And that fire that's ignited in you, at the vigil you spoke to, I don't want to use the word reckoning because it wasn't of that force, but you spoke about calling us into action. Like, what are the actions we can start to take now that we know what we know? Who do we choose to be, and what are we called to do with this new knowledge, awareness?
Yeah. And I think that's up to every, you as a church, as a congregation, are going to have those conversations about where do we go? How do we go? You have to do that personally within yourself, as a family, as a community, as a church. Like, it's going to be these big conversations, and we don't have the answers. I don't have the answers to tell people how to reconcile, because my form of reconciliation will be different than yours. I, as an Indigenous person with the history, is different than yours, which is also representative of the church and making peace with that. So this is where it gets complicated and messy.
Yeah.
Right? But it also shouldn't be, well, it's too complicated, so I don't want to do it. Because out of being complicated can become amazing relationships and friendships. And that will be the healing that will help move us forward.
Yeah. And that'll be the healing that brings the babies home.
Yeah. And to me, it is so important that we bring the babies home, or that the babies have a name. Right now they're 1 to 215. They don't have a name. Those names, being able to name them, being able to know which community they come from. And that's work that needs to happen within the communities, the Indigenous communities, about what's going to happen. We don't know that yet. But the babies need to come home.
Yeah. And however that might look, and how do we support the families in that journey and the grieving, and give space for that journey for everyone. And so what I feel like there's a visibility that has occurred as a result of this, that the babies are being seen in a whole new way. Finally, they've come to light. The orange building lighting up, the survivors' stories have come to life in this death that we've now become aware of, that we knew, but we didn't know, or we weren't willing or ready to know.
Right, right. And so for me, just watching, whether it's on media, social media, the compassion, even for me personally, to have friends reach out to me that week, just to say, how are you doing? Are you okay? A phone call, a note. But I certainly feel there is a shift in Canada that we can really start, or we really ignite it again, perhaps, Indigenous people being heard, and the history and the acknowledgement. It gets complicated because, these were stories that were passed on to us. And yes, they weren't written down. They were generational stories that were told, and they were accurate. And we didn't need it documented, and we didn't need it proven. But who needed it proven? Right? And why? Why do we need that? And it's the two cultures. So our culture is more oral tradition, oral stories, and we know they're true because they've been passed on from generation to generation. And another part of our society needs the proof, and they need the documents, and they need, and in order to accept the story. And so now we're at a place where we have both. We have the stories we've been told. We have the proof. Now, what do we do? How do we come together? How do we walk in Canada? As we head into National Indigenous Peoples Day, as we head into Canada Day, I think there'll be a lot of reflection. I don't think it is a time to celebrate. I think it's a time that we are quiet and we reflect and we ask ourselves questions about who we are as Canadians and as a country, and where do we want to go, and how do I allow Indigenous people to have the space in this country that they should have had for hundreds of years. And so that's where we're going to have to go.
Wow. Thank you for taking the time in a very busy time for you, a tender time for you. And so I hope you do get that trip away to tend to your soul, to be near the water, to be in the mountains, to be in nature, and to remember.
Yeah, I think it's important, that we all kind of look after our own souls, our own spirits. And, for me, it's a reflection, of really remembering my dad, and, who passed away December 3rd of last year. So it's just been a short 6 months. But I know he's here. And I know he's here with me. He gives me the strength. And I have my other dad still with me, who also gives me incredible strength too. And so, I will take that time this weekend to just really think about how blessed I am, and how blessed I am that the country is awakening, and also how much hope I have that, and I have to have hope that this is the beginning of change in a fundamental way, not just to say it, but we have to really start to get to the heavy work, because we've kind of done the free stuff, the easy stuff, but now we have to get to the tough stuff. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you so much for being my friend, my teacher, my confidant at times, and really such an inspiration for me to what it means to live and walk the path of reconciliation.
Hi, Cheryl.
215. 215 Indigenous children who can't come home. 215. How many more missing Indigenous children who won't come home? Why did it take so long revealing this ancient wrong when mothers cried through countless nights alone? Church and the government complicit in violence. How could such savagery stay unconfessed? If there's a God in heaven, you've been used again to subjugate, alienate, eradicate the other. I'm Christian, I'm Canadian, yet now ashamed of both. I weep with the indigenous and stand with all who mourn. Why did it take so long revealing this ancient wrong? The elders spoke, but we refuse to hear. The church and the government complicit in violence. How could something so evil happen here? Indigenous children stolen.
God of comfort, we come to you with hurting hearts. Truth has been revealed, and we lament for the breach the church has caused in our relationships with the first peoples of this land. The church has been a source of pain. To the weak, we refused strength. To the young, we refused care. O Holy One, guide us to heal and be healers. Forgive what has been done in the name of you, and help us to be the new you in the world with compassion and justice. Eternal love, eternal light, for words of cruelty and suffering unrelieved, we ask for guidance and strength to repair the breach and mend the harm. You entrusted us with knowledge of injustice against the Indigenous peoples in and through the church. Help us as we repent of the past and go forward in solidarity and with love. God of hope, you entrusted us with knowledge of justice. Help us as we seek it. You entrusted us with knowledge of wounds around us and in our church that need healing. Help us be a healing presence to mend the wounds and be repairers of the breach that we, our ancestors, have been a part of. And help us to minister in your name. God of love, God of healing, God of justice and of peace, we come to you knowing that if one suffers or rejoices, all suffer or rejoice. We acknowledge the hurt within our hearts. We pray that through partnership and walking together in the Spirit of Christ, that we will be healed. O guiding one, it is through you that respect, mutuality, and equity will be achieved. May we engage in your calls to act with justice and compassion. Let us remember. Let us remember the 215 babies found, and so many more that have been and will be found. Let us respond in faithful ways to contribute to the healing of relationship, the intergenerational healing of a people. Let us bring the children home to be honored and loved and remembered, always and in all ways. May God be our guide and our helper. Amen. For our ministry highlight today, Nigel will share an update on how we continue to live into the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
June is National Indigenous History Month, and tomorrow is National Indigenous Peoples Day. It is a reminder to reflect on the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. The commission was created through a legal settlement between residential school survivors, the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit representatives, and the parties responsible for the creation and operation of the schools, namely the federal government and the church bodies. The Commission's mandate was to inform all Canadians about what happened in residential schools. The Commission documented the truth of survivors, their families, communities, and anyone personally affected by the residential school experience. This included First Nations, Inuit, and Métis former residential school students, their families, communities, the churches, former school employees, government officials, and other Canadians. The Commission concluded its mandate in 2015. From that mandate came 94 calls to action for reconciliation. And of those 94 calls, 13 are applicable to us as a church, either directly or indirectly. The United Church of Canada officially recognizes the value in each of the calls of action, and in 2019 specifically responded to the calls to the churches and the ongoing actions the United Church aims to do in response to these calls. At UCoL, we are beginning to respond to 3 of these calls. The first is call number 48. Partially quoted, it says, "We call upon the church parties to the settlement agreement and all other faith groups and interfaith social justice groups in Canada who have not already done so, to formally adopt and comply with the principles, norms, and standards of the United Nations Declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples as a framework for reconciliation. We have begun attempting this through the partnership and request forms for the social justice team and outreach funding. We place our church's principle on the request forms and included a section that states that our principles include to actively work towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and to uphold the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The second is call number 59, which says, we call upon church parties to the settlement agreement to develop ongoing education strategies to ensure that their respective congregations learn about their church's role in colonization, the history and legacy of residential schools, and why apologies to former residential school students, their families, and communities were necessary. To this call, we have actively been involved in the walk in the spirit of reconciliation. The purpose of the walk being to bring awareness to the horrible harm the residential schools did to the Indigenous community, which included the intentional attempt at terminating the Indigenous culture, religion, and identity. This year, our involvement played a key and significant role in the growth of this walk. We created a dedicated website and a 5-minute welcoming video. We doubled the number of people registered to walk this year compared with last. And we doubled the number of people following the Reconciliation Facebook page. And there is a potential for more growth in this walk next year as word spreads. This year alone, people from New Brunswick, Kamloops, and the United States joined us and wanted t-shirts to walk in solidarity. Hopefully next year we would have more time to include them in our planning, and others perhaps. Because their response exceeded our expectations, we even ran out of t-shirts in some sizes. The third is call number 61, which says, we call upon church parties to the settlement agreement in collaboration with survivors and representatives of Aboriginal organizations to establish permanent funding to Aboriginal people for community-controlled healing and reconciliation projects, community-controlled culture and language revitalization projects, community-controlled education and relationship-building projects, regional dialogues for Indigenous spiritual leaders and youth to discuss Indigenous spirituality, self-determination, and reconciliation. We have taken a small step towards this by allocating a portion of our social justice and outreach budget this year towards Indigenous reconciliation, to give back even just a small portion of the funding that we have benefited from on unceded Indigenous lands. In response to the potential increased trauma in the Indigenous community from the discovery of the remains of 215 children on the grounds of the former Kamloops Residential School, we donated a portion of this budget allocated to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, an Indigenous-run provincial organization that provides essential services to residential school survivors, their families, and those dealing with intergenerational trauma through multiple methods of support, including counseling, health, and cultural support. There's a lot more that needs to be done for reparation and reconciliation, from us as a church, from us as a denomination, from us as individuals, and from us as colonizers in this country. To use the cliche, every journey begins with a step. What's our next step?
The Spirit has called, and now we answer. Your donations have been hard at work providing pastoral support and justice and outreach actions in response to the news we all received about the children being found in the ground at the Kamloops Residential School and now many other residential school sites. Our congregational's response by ministers, staff, and members is made possible by your generosity. Rentals continue to be down since there are still restrictions on indoor gatherings, so we continue to rely heavily on donations. We hope you're inspired to give to support United Churches of Langley so we can continue to respond in pastoral and outreach ways. You can give through our online platform GivePoint, one time or regularly. Or you can set up a PAR, a pre-authorized giving account, through our offices here at the church. Or you can mail or drop off a check to our Murrayville location, and the address is in the YouTube notes. As always, please like and share this video with friends, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We give you thanks for your generosity, for your participation in our ministry, and for being with us in the journey of being repairers of the breach.
Each blade of grass, every wing that soars, the waves that sweep across a distant shore, make full the circle of God. Each laughing child, every gentle eye, a forest lit beneath a moon-bright sky, make full the circle of God. Each silent paw, every rounded stone, the buzz that echoes from a honeyed comb, make full the circle of God. Each vibrant star, every outstretched hand, the wind that leaps and sails across a land, make full the circle of God. Each icy peak, every patterned shell, the joyous chorus that the dawn foretells, make full the circle of God. Each cosmic hue, every creature's way, all form the beauty of this vast array, making full the circle of God.
Holy One, Creator God, by your spirit and imagination, light the path to right relationships. Help us to understand each other clearly and rejoice in one another's strength. Help us to listen to each other deeply and join in the friendship dance. Help us guard each other's rights and walk long together in good company. Give us courage, creativity, and commitment to our journey. Help us keep faith with each other and so with you. Holy One, Creator, God beyond tribes and nations, be with us all. Amen.
Thank you.